While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. As loyal listeners of this podcast know, I'm a big believer in paying close attention to the little things, the blocking and tackling, the basics, the fundamentals, all those elementary elements that comprise the building blocks of stronger cybersecurity plans and successful defensive strategies. Spoiler alert, this comes through again and again in this episode. But what makes it worth your time is how my guest, Jesper Sønderby Andersen, the global head of customer success at Secomea, goes beyond just discussing how all those little things can both kill and cure your cyber defenses, but how they should all fit together. It's about more than just protecting against credential theft and phishing schemes, but how things like proper segmentation strategies and remote access management make your company more competitive. It's not just that you need to leverage AI, but how to use it in changing your company culture and enabling other complementary technologies. If you allow me to channel a childhood hero, Hannibal Smith from TV's The A-Team, it's not just about the plan, but how it comes together. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jesper Sønderby Andersen. Jesper, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time. Appreciate you coming on Security Breach.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a big pleasure for me.
Absolutely. So I think where we'll get started here, I know Secomea is huge into remote monitoring, especially for the industrial sector. There's a lot of things that have taken place over the last even 5 years that have really made this an interesting place to be when it comes to remote monitoring. Maybe you could just kind of give us some oversights on some of the things that you've seen and how this has evolved and some of the things that have popped up in terms of what needs the most solution or most attention right now.
Yeah. Definitely, a lot has happened. I've been here at Secomea for 3 years. In the last 12 months, the volume of ask from manufacturer coming in has just increased dramatically. This is definitely a topic. Both we are out of Denmark, so we are also both in Europe and US and Japan and China. But the regulation over here is also driving a lot. And NIS2 is coming out and saying, hey, you have to do something about your remote access. That's driving a lot too, but also just the pressure from attack vectors using supply chains has really ramped up the need for remote access in this. So I've been here 3 years. The volume coming in the last 12 months have just been really, really high. And a lot of that is driven by, yes, there is compliance part of it, but there's also the supply chain risk of, hey, you have an OT environment, you have a lot of vendors coming in. We see companies where there's more communication coming into the OT network than actually coming from inside vendors. So all of that has driven a lot of development inside of the area here. And then, Jeff, I think also just the fact that remote access is a great business enabler has really driven a lot too. Like, it is deep down the only reason to have an open connection outside. Remote access into an OT environment is if you need something, if it has to do with uptime, cost savings, collaboration through innovation. So for a lot of CISOs, this is an area where they really get to engage the CTO. How can we enable your business? Go to those guys, have this kind of project where we really focus on, hey, how do we enable your guys on the plant? How do we make sure the plant runs, delivers good results? So it is a good project to get started with for CISO, especially global CISOs coming in. They want to have a project that gives a lot of value to the business, that increases their security. And it is a great way to start with a remote access focused project, because it does deliver a lot of pure value. Yes, it is a cybersecurity play. It's really important, but it's also about enabling the business. So those two sort of play really well together.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I would think one of the bigger challenges we're dealing with here too is who's responsible. We've sort of got that IT and OT working in silos. What's been your experience in sort of breaking that down and just getting to the stakeholder?
Yeah. So the way that we usually approach it from our end is that we do say, hey, because we see it as, yes, cybersecurity, but also business enablement tool, we do see it more focused on the OT. We usually go in and say, hey, with the CISO, and this is also what we've seen being very effective, is like, let's go to the OT guys on the floor, because at the end of the day, those are what's going to use it. What are their requirements? What do they actually need? What protocols do they work on? What workflows do they need to have this done? And then also laying of course, the security part of it. And that sort of naturally grows into ending up at the OT environment. And yes, they have a lot of overlap, but because OT has so many specialized protocols, a lot of what we see is that the IT coming from the IT side just doesn't work. Like literally doesn't work. The latency is way too long. They're not used to working with the latency that you need for a connection in OT to work, because it's legacy machines. So it's different protocols, and the network design is a lot different. So we usually sort of end up that way, is why we end up with a more OT focused team around us. And then for the sort of more credential-based Active Directory, IMI tooling set, that usually comes from the IT side. So we sort of make sure that the teams have both sides of it, because they need that from IT, or often it comes naturally from IT because they're already so heavily involved in your identity management.
No, it makes sense. Circling back a little bit, looking at remote access, we've got a couple different variables here, and maybe we can break these down a little bit. First of all, we can talk about vendors. Obviously, we want them to have access in some respect to the network so they can help us troubleshoot and repair and get back up and running. Yeah. What do you see there as maybe some of the biggest challenges from the vendor perspective, as well as maybe some things that you found that work well in helping them in, but still keeping everything secure?
Yeah. And that is really like one of the things that we see is the biggest challenge that needs to be, if you're doing a remote access or having remote access, you need to tackle this one up front. You obviously need to make damn sure you know what assets are they touching, who are they, and what protocols are they touching, and who is approving their access. So you really build up that security chain for them. So you have the field. But most OT tools are capable of doing that, and that's more about setting it up. I really see the challenges as, well, we both see the challenges from the vendor side, because they're also saying, hey, we maybe have 1,000 customers. If you're coming with 1,000 login to us, that's going to be a problem for us to manage. The cost is going to go up. But at the end of the day, you have to see it from a manufacturing point of view, saying, I'm the one that is liable. I'm the one that is going to have the liability problem here, legally or cost-wise. So I'm going to have to standardize some way. I can't have, like, we sometimes meet customers who have like 25 different remote access tools coming into an environment. That's never going to be secure, because you just can't manage it. I don't care how secure they are. At the end of the day, that's just too much for a cybersecurity team, OT cybersecurity team to manage. So they have to standardize on something and then letting them in. And then I do think it is about making sure that you have good discipline around your vendor management, because we see companies who have 300 vendor suppliers globally, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 users coming into their network. That just takes time. So like my advice in this to the CISO would be, hey, this is a task you can't minimize. You have to go out together with your supply chain managers who knows these vendors really well, go together with them and make sure that you are sort of have a united front with them, because this is a problem for both sides of the coin, and it is something that we as an industry need to help them solve. So my suggestion to CISOs, and what I've seen work really well, especially one large customer who had onboarded 300 to 400 suppliers, 2,000 to 3,000 users, they actually took their supply team in to be part of the project, to be a key stakeholder, so sort of be co-driver, product owner on this, and they then ran it together, and that worked really, really well in getting them onboarded. So I do think, yes, when you talk about vendors, it is about setting up the right security chain so that you know who they are. With MFA, SSO, you need to make sure you understand request for access just in time, so you know who is coming in and everything is approved. You need to order log, and all of those things are really key. But to get to that point, you really need to think through the project. of getting this many onboarded, getting this many into your organization in a good way. And because this is going to be your key risk factor. Like your internal one is the one you sort of have more control over. With this many suppliers that most OT have coming into their network, you're also going to see a big variant in how professional these guys are. Your vendors coming in, how good are they to educate their people around phishing attacks? Credential theft is a really, really big thing, and it's something we're seeing more and more in OT, very, very targeted. We see supply chains attack where they go after a small supplier that does service provisioning for them. They get in this way. The team is maybe not that skilled in OT security as they probably should be, as your own people are, and this is their way in. So you have to sort of put the resources down to manage those suppliers, and you have to sort of look at where are they in the journey, and you have to be very clear on what you want from them.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of great stuff there, Jesper. And I think the big takeaway there is the manufacturers have to take responsibility in establishing those standards and really validating everything that's going on. I think in a lot of instances, when you start inviting vendors in, the onus is placed on those vendors and suppliers as opposed to the manufacturer taking responsibility. And I think that gets lost in translation sometimes.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right. Like that is, you need to take ownership over this if you're going to be successful in managing those vendors and having the right security attack. And we just have to be honest, whether it's a state actor who's coming in, whether it's a small one, this is a key vulnerability, and they know it out there. We can see that the threat actors definitely know that this is a key way of getting into OT, and we have seen some really bad cases around this.
Absolutely. So the other part of this, and you mentioned a lot of phishing and a lot of different types of attacks that are coming in through a lot of these remote connections. The other part of this, when we talk about remote access, are employees checking things, especially over the pandemic. We had a lot of folks checking in on equipment from home or other places, even when we're traveling. That becomes a real security issue as well. What have you seen in terms of the evolving threat landscape or solutions that we have just in dealing with internal people as well?
Yeah. I think one of the things that sort of, in my opinion, has really changed is that you really need to put some of the same guardrails on you would as an external vendor on your internal OT people, because you cannot, you have to do a lot around educating them on phishing attack and making sure that the AD isn't compromised. But we constantly see SSO, ADs, MFA being compromised and getting them in that way. And then you have to be sure that you also look at what is, presume that they are actually like zero trust, that they're already compromised. Now they're coming in, they're doing a remote access. In my opinion, what you need to do is sort of risk-based control of it, them looking at what equipment are there. If they're accessing your crown jewels from home, maybe you have session recording on, even though it's your own people. You have the same security span on them as if they were external on these high part of it. And then there can be other parts of the network where they are allowed remotely to access in a different way, because it's a seasoned machine, it's not that much, it's a palleting machine. Okay, then we can maybe relax the control a little bit as you go in. But I really think, like, my advice would be to any plant is that you go out and say risk-based control. What is the operational impact if the solution is going down? What is the user's risk profile? Internal engineer, remote, or also where in the world are they remote from? Also has a part to play in definitely in this. And then from there, risk evaluate how deep do the security chain needs to be for even for internal ones. And before, we saw a lot of people going in and saying, hey, you can have access to a subnet. Like, we're just going to give you access to a full subnet or the full network. You're going to remote in. Yes, you do MFA. We have an audit log on you. But once you're in, you can do whatever you want. I think more and more we are seeing that we're moving away from that. If you are remotely, we want to see you pick a specific endpoint, all the same security features, so we know who you are, your just-in-time access. We are maybe monitoring your session. We're definitely audit logging everything you do, just to make sure that you never know who's compromising your initial user. So we definitely see that more and more. And I think it's a good way of sort of making sure you're also doing segmentation. So so why are you allowing your internal users to cross your network all the time without being specific where they're going? If you're then setting up segmentation your network, and then you have an internal user who from home is able to jump from network to network without actually authorizing that more than once who they are, that simply doesn't make, from a security perspective, make sense.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up segmentation. It's such an interesting topic because a lot of folks see that as sort of the be all end all solution. Yeah. I think it's a big part of it. Don't get me wrong, but I think we can't rely exclusively on just segmenting all of our network endpoints and think we're done and we're good. No. I think one of the things that's really muddied those waters is the fact that we have so many more points of connectivity on the plant floor within the OT networks. And then you combine that with the fact that in manufacturing specifically, we have a huge issue simply with visibility right now and just understanding where all of our assets are. Yeah. Jesper, I know this is like a big question, tackling a couple of big topics here, but when you look at all these connection points and the visibility issues and the fact that we maybe either don't do enough segmentation or rely on it too heavily, how do you see all of this stuff sort of converging and either simplifying or making things more complex from a security perspective?
Yeah. And I think one thing that also adds to this is the fact that these segmentation projects a lot of times are very expensive. They're very hard to do, and they're very hard to keep up to date afterwards because there's so much coming in, new system coming in. You really have to audit that thing too. So yes, I also think segmentation is key, but what it does, I think we need to remember what it's for. It's to minimize blast radius and lateral movement. Like that's what we're protecting against when we segment this. And these are costly projects. So yes, you need to do it. Definitely, no question about it. But I do think you need to be very smart about what you're doing. Because what we're also seeing, you mentioned like asset visibility into assets. I saw it's like a 5% of OT cybersecurity that they say that have good visibility into their OT asset, and it's actually falling. So if you microsegment and you don't have visibility in the same, where do you know where you are? And also, it is again about just minimizing the splash radius if you get attacked, lateral movement, limiting that. So you have to be clear on what it does. And I've also, just to be honest, we've seen from a few big customers project where these segmentation projects can run for years. And if you run them for years, and that's your only defense, you're still having remote access coming into your network constantly during that time, and you don't really have control over that part of it, then you have a really long span where, yes, you have now microsegmented your network, but through remote access, you're jumping between the different network again. So in my opinion, if I would start this segmentation journey by saying, hey, do I actually have a perimeter outside that is good enough so I can control who comes in? Do I have enough visibility to actually do the segmentation, and not just do the segmentation, but also understand what happens afterwards, so you don't get too much drift in these segmentations afterwards, because they can easily be breached by accidentally putting two PCs too close together in a network. Like, it's so easy to breach these segmentation afterwards, and then you are, hey, it wasn't that effective as you go. So really make sure you know who's coming in, you have a strong perimeter, you have a clear understanding of your assets, and then you can segment. That would be sort of my approach to it.
Getting back to the visibility a little bit and the asset management part of it, that's such a big part of the OT challenge right now.
Yes.
And I think the biggest part of that is we don't always know where to start because we've got all these connections and all these different assets out there. What advice or perspective could you give folks to just a jumping off point, a reasonable one, where they don't get caught, trying to drink the ocean?
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to. I think sometimes in OT cybersecurity, in every cybersecurity, you always have to look at what can you get for your money. How do you get the most bang for your buck? Because you are in manufacturing, chances are your margins are pretty low. You're not going to get the huge budget that you actually need. So you really have to prioritize what projects can you get. So I would say, let's say you get started, you definitely start by, hey, going to your plant manager. What is your crown jewel? What is the stuff that runs, that gives you the most profit that you can't live without? Okay, understanding that we have those, because there is a lot of systems on the periphery. There are a lot of PLCs on the periphery, PLC packaging machine. Okay, then we sort of segment those crown jewels and start there, and then we build from there. So definitely be aware in every plant, what is your crown jewel? And then I also would say, in terms of getting assets, also make it a little bit easy for you. Start with your perimeter and then start with remote access, because then you're seeing what is actually coming in. That will give you sort of a lot of asset discovery for free. just saying who's coming in, who's connecting. This must be the things that I need to protect. That is really key to me. So I think you need to take these projects sort of one at a time, because if you do them in the right order, so segmentation, visibility, remote access, if you do start with your crown jewel, know who those are, remote access, visibility, segmentation, because then it becomes easier. I've seen a lot of these projects get bogged down because they start in a way where they take the hard part, the segmentation first, meaning now you need to know all your assets to do it. You need to know all your traffic you don't have any visibility into. So my advice would be to take them smart, because yes, you get remote access, but then you can also get part of your segmentation for free, because now you can sort of say, hey, you can only go to that endpoint. You also get part of the assets visibility for free, because now you have your OT guys tell you what they need to access on an everyday basis. Where is vendors coming in? So you sort of get some of it for free. But I do think it is, like you're saying, Jeff, it is a really big problem in OT that we have such a poor insight into our assets, and there is quite a way to us to really understand our environment, and that really slows us down in making ourselves secure.
Now, I like what you said there about starting with the crown jewels, understanding what's most important. And we've heard a lot of folks talk about that, just establishing the right priorities and moving from there. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because I think, especially in like when you have a lot coming in, what is it that you are sure you can't run around? Because a lot of it in an attack, we've had customers who've been attacked where you also see, hey, these crown jewels, we can't run without them, but this palleting over here, we can throw people at it and solve it if we get attacked. So I think in OT, you have a limited budget. You really have to think about, how do I spend that on my crown jewels? How do I do the projects in the right order? And that's how you gain the most security.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. You talked a little bit about phishing and some of the state-sponsored actors and the impact that they have now, really going after the ICS, the industrial control systems. What are you seeing from the threat landscape? Is it more complex? Is there more use of AI? Is there better targeting? We know the tactics haven't changed a ton, but there's still a lot more. The bad guys are getting a lot smarter, a lot more complex. Yeah. What are you seeing out there?
So I think one thing I will say about it, because I think we easily get bogged down in sort of state actors' threats, which is it is real, and the impact when it happens is a lot. So we sometimes tend to get focused on what they are coming with. At the same time, we are not cleaning up our firewall rules. I really think one thing I'm seeing is when we look at attacks, we are still in OT, 5% of our visibility is only 5%. We really need to think about the small stuff. Do you have your firewall rules under control? Do you have your users under control? Do you know what they're actually doing before you move along to some of the bigger stuff? Because what we're seeing is what is still getting into most plants, most manufacturers, isn't the high-end stuff. Yes, some are also coming in. State actors can definitely see them being very active. But still, a lot of it, what they're actually getting it through is the smaller stuff. Your firewall rules, your open remote access connection without closing them down. The credential that hasn't been deleted, that has been for the employee that has been gone for 6 months. Those are still where the vast majority of our attacks is coming in. So I think we see that a lot. But also then, in terms of what is coming down the pipeline, I think supply chain attack is where a lot of it is starting to come in. Whether it's through a compromised software from an OEM that has put that into your environment and you're now compromised, or that is remote vendors coming into your environment. That is a big one, and I only think that's going to be bigger. And then I think AI is going to allow some of these smaller attacks to be automated, which is just going to make it worse. So the amount of attacks you're going to get on these lower phishing attacks, see if they can do man-in-the-middle attack, those are going to be so easy to do. There's just going to be much more of them, and they're going to be automated. They're going to use this agentic technology to just try to brute force your way into it. Where can they find a hole that somebody makes a mistake, or you made a mistake on your firewall rules, or something small to that? So the low end of attack is going to be much more and much heavier. So really make sure that you tackle sort of the bare minimum of it. would be my way of looking at it, because I think that's the first way that's gonna come with AI. And then yes, there's gonna come a big state actor threats also from this, but you have to make sure you have your bases covered before you start worrying about quantum computing taking you down. It's key. Yes, it's coming. We need to prepare for it long term, but you have to manage where you are as a company.
Yeah. It's interesting. So much of this comes back to what I always talk about is the blocking and tackling. I mean, this is basic stuff when we talk about credentials and firewalls and things like that, but they still go overlooked. They're still a big issue.
Yeah, and I love your football analogy, because I'm from Denmark, so it should be soccer, but I'm a big football fan guy. For some reason, I just fell in love with the sport, and a lot of times I do think about what sort of Bill Belichick says about, like, you do have to do your fundamentals right. Like, are you doing your fundamentals right? So keeping that football analogy, if you want to win the Super Bowl, you have to make sure your footwork is great on your linemen, on your linebackers, and all of that is really key to make sure you have the basic before you move to somewhere else. So I always sort of come back to that and say, okay, when I go in to look at an environment and to sort of advise customers on where they are, is the fundamental covered before we move to the next level? Like, that for a lot of OT, where they are right now is the fundamental covered.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. It's definitely, and again, we get so bogged down with all the different options out there, things to go after. We forget to prioritize and get the basics. So I couldn't agree with you more. You know, you've mentioned, Jesper, a couple times supply chains and the vulnerabilities, and people are becoming the bad guys are becoming more aware of the inroads they can make through supply chains. That is both a very volatile but sensitive area when it comes to manufacturers and working with their supply chain partners. Yes. What have you seen as far as tactics in terms of approaching some of these folks and getting them on board from a cybersecurity perspective?
So I think that's you're hitting the nail on the head there, because I do think this is something where we work a lot with our customers on, and we advise the customers a lot about how do you approach your OEMs about it. And we have a lot of experience because we are also very big in the OEM space. So I think the way I usually say is, like, you have to approach it as a change management perspective with them. Not every OEM is the same. There is a huge difference on dealing with a small local OEM service provider vendor and then dealing with some of the bigger guys up there. And you have to understand the difference in where they are. And you also have to be clear on what is your dynamic. That's why you need your supply chain partner in on this, because what is your dynamic with this company right now? A lot of times what we then see, then it's an SLA contract that is blocking for the right security setup. So you have to take them into account and really understand before you go out to them from a security perspective to talk to them, what is your relationship with this partner? And where do you stand contractually and all of that? So you really need to have a fuller understanding when a cybersecurity OT goes in and say, hey, we need to do something about this vendor, their setup. You have to understand the full picture of the business together with them, especially with some of the bigger ones. And then what we have seen work really well is have a change management perspective, because a lot of them are very, very customer centric. Like, they want to do what's best for you, but you have to take them along into a journey that makes sense for you, that makes sense for them. And you have to see it from their perspective. Okay, I'm coming with this tool. I want you to do more around cybersecurity. How can we partner with you? Because those perspectives we've seen work really, really well. If you come to them and say, hey, we are the ones that are liable. We have the compliancy. We have the risk. We have a need here. How can we work with your team to get there? And how can we understand them? And then find ways because if you're just going to go to them as your OT engineer, call them up and say, hey, I need you to do something else, change this for me. You might not get the right guy that understands what you're talking about. You might just get the local service guy who's like, oh, what is this? I'm not cybersecurity educated. So you really need to be more strategic about how do you approach these vendors, because when you approach them, the vast majority, and we spend a lot of time with customers on this, working through these OEM and service vendors. Once you sit down with them, they want to help, they want to be supported, they understand that you are the one sitting with the requirement, the liability, they want to help you, but you also have to see it from their side and approach it as a dialogue, not just hand them a sheet of demands. Then they're gonna naturally, as human being, be back off, and that has nothing to do with what they actually want from you. and what they're willing to do from you. So if you approach them that way, we have seen a lot of success. And then, yeah, it might take a little bit of time because in one case they needed to educate 1,000 people in training them this new system. You can't just say, hey, you have a new system you need to go through this cybersecurity, go do. That's a big cost on their side of doing business with you now. And you have to give them time to get there. You have to help, and you have to be enabling. Okay, how can we make this training good for you? How can we make this tool work well for you? How can we support you in doing that? If you just come as the OEM and demand and not take that part of the perspective into it, this is very costly for them. To educate 500 people in your way of wanting to have these phishing attacks, you want to use this tool, you want to have this way of working. That's not just something that they're going to do overnight. So you really have to take them in as part of this journey. And once you do that, what we're seeing is that they're very helpful, they're very understandable, and they also want to be part of it. And they might also come back to you and say, that's great, but we also have a cybersecurity risk here from accessing your network. So yes, we also want, but we have also on our side, it's not just you. You can also very easily, we can connect to one of your PLC that is infected, and by choice or by not, importing that into our system, and we serve thousands of customers globally. We also have standards for you that you need to follow to be part of this back and forth. And I think that's a very healthy discussion.
Absolutely. And I like the way you described it as change management, because I think sometimes when we say cybersecurity, it freaks people out. They don't want to know enough about it. It encourages sort of an ostrich in the sand type of approach to looking at things. You talk about change management. If there's one thing supply chain and manufacturing understands over the last couple of years, it's the need for change management. So I like that.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Makes sense. Jesper, we've been talking a lot about different factors. Maybe you could educate us a little bit more on Secomea and some of the stuff that the company does in support of industrial cybersecurity and what the company is really focused on.
Yeah. So we are a full-on remote access focused company. So we focus just on the OT environment, has done so for around 15 years. Started all the way back focusing on phishing attacking and getting remote access on the OEM side, and then have sort of slowly developed into more the manufacturing side. But really what we focus on at Secomea is to make sure that, yes, remote access is really key, but it has to be around also enablement. It has to be around what is the plan. We sort of grew up dealing with plants and OT engineers. So our product is really designed for how do we make sure that whether it's the vendor or the OT engineer on the floor has the tool he has to actually do his job. Because at the end of the day, we really need to think about that this is an enablement tool. If it doesn't work for the OT guys and your vendors, letting them in, then you can put as much security around it, they're going to go the other way around. So we're really focusing on making sure we have a tool suite that first of all fits to the old legacy world, new world also, but that really enables the OT guys to do a good job, and then make it's easy for them to the security. So the global CISO can say, hey, you need to be enabled. We'll pick a tool that you love, that you really like using, that does what you need, but I'm gonna put these security layers on top of it, so automatically you can't make a mistake there. You have your clear security chain through. I'm gonna go that in as a global CISO and say these are the standards, but I know with the tool that I'm bringing to you that you will love it. You're not gonna find a use case in your, because like this is also the problem with OTs, like you have a ton of legacy systems that are never going to be changed, or at least not in the next 15 years is going to be changed. So you have to have a flexible tool that can both do the new world stuff, but that can also do an uplink port on something you have in the corner. Otherwise, you're going to find that that's going to be your hole in there. You're going to put something else on there that is unsecure. So we really focus on a solution that is flexible to be able to really accommodate whatever plant, whatever network, whatever you're in. Because we work with a lot with really big global companies. And through M&A, through time, they have a ton of different network, ton of different machines, ton of different PLCs, and a ton of different setups up around the world. Like the setup in Asia might not be the one that they have in the US. That might be very, very different organizations. So we really focus on making sure the OT guys has what they need, being flexible so we can fit into whatever network we are out there. Because let's just be honest, if you're a global company, global manufacturer, you are going to have a lot of different setup. You dream about standardization, but yeah, to be honest, to be sure, I'm going to cross a lot of CISO dreams here. It's never going to happen for you guys. It's never going to happen. The top level is going to buy you, and you're never going to get the budget you need to redo the whole plan. So you have to have something that is flexible, that still offers the security you need. And then as CISO, you want to set the standards to them so you can make the plan guys do what they need to do securely without being able to make a mistake, open a connection that they shouldn't open, with the right security controls in. And that's really the space that Secomea has been focusing on over the last 15 years. So how do we do that very well? And that's sort of what Secomea does.
Excellent. No, good to know there's somebody out there that's so focused on the OT environment. We see a lot of different providers out there, a lot of different solutions, offerings, and they go across the board. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of getting into medical and healthcare and financial markets. But with you guys being so focused on the OT environment, that offers a little bit different perspective.
Yeah, and it's also about, like, first of all, the legacy part of it is, but it's also small stuff like latency. We spend our days, my engineers spend the days figuring out how can they optimize this latency, because it doesn't matter in IT world. It matters a lot over here. So yes, I mean, there are overlaps, but again, there are a lot of small specific where when they call our guys, when we do a lot of big implementation with companies, and the guys that sit with us in the implementation teams really know and understand OT. Our engineering team sits very close with our engineering guys that actually does the implementation. So there's a lot of cross-pollination. So this is how we keep this sort of really understand the OT environment. And I do think that is key, that it's not just about taking an IT guy in and then saying, hey, now it's the same, go do. It's really isn't the same. You really have to understand what is the different nuances in OT. And sometimes they are minor, but they have a huge impact once you flip that switch and you go into production. Then you all suddenly, it's too slow, we can't react, and all of those small things that then really matter in the production environment.
No, makes sense. Jesper, wrapping things up, this has been awesome. A lot of great insight here. I'm definitely glad we can share this with the audience. This is a question I ask everybody in sort of closing up the episodes. Looking forward here, what are some of the bigger trends you see coming down the road, maybe the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah. So it's hard not to say, like, I think almost every guest I can imagine says AI right now is something that is coming. I do think, like, if I say, like, one thing is, like, a lot of CISOs is focusing on, hey, how can we use AI to optimize? Like, the human factor is a big problem. We have a huge shortage in skill in OT. I hire all the time for a growing company. Like, it's a pain in the ass to find good enough OT engineers, cybersecurity engineers out there. Yes, AI is going to solve that. You have a lot of tools. But I really think what the CISO needs to be thinking about is, we have had this explosion in IoT coming into the OT network. That's just going to be much harder with AI, because what's going to happen is your OT engineers, your vendors, your IT is going to be much more proliferating in building new updates to system, building new system. Like, the vibe coding is really real, and it may be going to take a little bit longer to get to OT, because we are usually take a little bit more of time, but this is coming. So if you are a CISO, think about how are you going to be an enabler in this? And a lot of it is that you have to get in front of all of this. How are you going to handle all this coming in? Because for sure, if you are sitting back and saying, no, we need to validate, I'm not ready yet, you're going to get run over by these, because it's going to be such a big competitive edge, AI, that your company is not going to have a choice in this. So how do you make sure, now you know this amount of application is coming in, more updates, both from internal and vendors. How do you think about building a compliant pipeline where you then make sure you have time, you have both the resources and the skill people to actually review these new ones coming in, and you maybe build a platform around it so you don't have to review it individually. So when an AI tool come in and an agentic AI tool come in, how do you evaluate that? Can you already start to put that on formula? I think they are underestimating the pressure that is going to come on them as CISO, as OT environment, from AI applications, data, that is going to come in. How do you deal with that as a CISO? Because you're not going to stand there and say, hey, I'm not ready yet. This pressure is going to come on you. This is going to come into the OT environment. It's just a matter of, are you already talking to your upper C-level about how do we get ready to do this in a secure way? Because if you can do that, then you can both be a business enabler, you can do this safely for the company, and you can really deliver a lot of security and a lot of value for your organization. If you are now already 12 months ahead upfront with this, talking about to your C-level, how are we going to do this? This is my strategy. This is how I'm going to enable. I'm not going to slow down your AI integration. I'm actually going to enable it, making sure that it can run much faster. You're going to get the budget and the ear of the C-level right now. So that is where I would place myself if I was a CISO at an OT company.
Absolutely. Two things you brought up there that I think are really important. You didn't say the word culture, but that's essentially what you're talking about with a lot of these steps that can be taken in the C-suite in developing a culture where everyone is thinking about cybersecurity as part of their day-to-day. The other thing is, and we don't talk about this enough in terms of cybersecurity and the benefits, but it does offer a competitive advantage as well when you get out ahead of these things and avoid any of the downtime, any of the compliance issues, any of the ransomware reporting or whatever else that can arise as a result of not having the proper cybersecurity things in place.
Yeah, and we definitely see that's when we work with a lot of global CISOs around the world, and you can definitely see the ones that are very strategic in thinking about how do I get this to my C-level, to my board, how do I educate them, but also how do I make sure that both the C-suite but also the plant managers are very aware of this, and I understand how to frame this in a business perspective. Like you're saying, how can I make sure that this actually ties together both security but also an enablement for it? Because the impact, just ask some of the guys that has been, sometimes I say, hey, we shouldn't do it by fear, do it by business enablement, but we also have to be real to the C-level, that the impact of these attacks that you have seen some really heavy one, you've seen Clorox and others, that has really, where they have been really hard hit, and the C-level is no longer there, the board is no longer there, and stuff like that. This does have an impact. So you have to be both, what is the business enablement, but also be real about what is the attack that is coming in and what is the impact of us. And as a global CISO, constantly be building that narrative to your board, to your plant, inside of your organization. That's almost your most important job, to make sure your team has the resources, the coverage to actually do their job.
Thanks, Jesper. And for more information on the company, you can check them out at Secomea.com. I'd also like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Jesper Sønderby Andersen, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.